Oh, it's Question Time, live on BBC One.
Well, have you made your mind up yet? Polling suggests millions of people have yet to decide how they will vote exactly a week today, and millions more will be voting for the first time, of course. Both groups are represented here tonight. We are in Birmingham. It's the beating heart of the West Midlands, where the City Council recently declared itself bankrupt, forcing huge cuts in spending, large increases in council tax, a trend repeated in quite a few parts of the UK. Our audience here, as always, reflects the electoral picture across the country. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, we have Andrew Mitchell from the Conservatives, Deputy Foreign Secretary in a long political career. He's also served in the governments of John Major and David Cameron. If Labour win the election, Yvette Cooper is very likely to be the new Home Secretary, responsible for our borders, national security and the police. She's one of the few Labour frontbenchers with government experience, having been in the cabinet of Gordon Brown. Layla Moran speaks for the Liberal Democrats on foreign affairs. She was one of 15 Lib Dem MPs in the Commons when the election was called last month. And Stephen Flynn runs the Scottish National Party's Westminster group of MPs. That number stood at 43 when Parliament was dissolved. Good evening. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to our audience here. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. I just want to point out we have a large number of first-time voters in our audience. You're in the front couple of rows, I think. Very nice to see you. We'll be very intrigued to hear what you've got to say as part of tonight's debate. So, without further ado, let's get started with our first question, which is from Stephen Rhodes.
Hello. Just 3 weeks ago, in my hometown of Nuneaton, my friend was stabbed and killed outside a shopping centre. A 16-year-old has been arrested and charged. You all say that you're going to increase police presence to try and tackle antisocial behaviour and knife crime, but what else are you going to do about it?
Well, Stephen, first of all, my condolences, of course. Your friend, Tom Ellis, I believe, and I know you've got his family's permission to talk about him this evening. I mean, first of all, just tell us about him.
I've known Tom probably just only over 12 months when he joined our squash club. But he just fitted in straight away. He's a lovely lad, a gentle giant, had a partner. They used to come up to the squash club, have a social drink on a Friday night, probably because it was a nice, easy, safe place to go and have a drink, I suppose. He just really fitted in well, loving life. Like I said, 25 years old, doing what anyone else would do. He'd got a job, saving up for his first property so they could actually find somewhere to actually, you know, live together. And then, in a blink of an eye, gone.
Well, look, I mean, it's a tragedy, obviously. You say, you know, everyone says they're all going to increase a police presence. What else do you want the party to do? You've got 4 politicians on the panel here tonight. What would you like them to do?
Well, I've actually read the manifestos of all the major parties on this sort of element of crime and antisocial behaviour. Apologise to you, Stephen, I haven't read the Scottish one, though. OK. Labour, you're saying that you're going to tag people. Well, in my opinion, that's just like putting a collar on an XL bully. It can still bite you. We've got the Conservatives. They want to increase... I've said before, they all want to increase police presence. They're looking... they're looking at, I think, artificial intelligence for face recognition. There's no point doing that unless you stop people going around towns in balaclavas and hoodies. So unless you back that up, that's pointless as well. The Liberal Democrats are going completely the other way, where they actually want to stop the amount of stop and searches that are going on.
Or reduce them.
Reduce them, sorry, not stop. And then you've got UK reform. There's no one here tonight. But they say that they want custodial sentence just for carrying a knife, and that they want to increase the stop and search.
And that's something you'd welcome, is it?
I'd rather have that than any of the others.
Well, look, let's ask the parties. I mean, Stephen, obviously I'm going to come to you as well. Clearly, it's not an area you have jurisdiction over. You can talk about Scotland. I spoke to you before we came on air, Stephen. What Stephen doesn't want is sympathy. Let's take that as a given. It's a terrible situation. What would you do about it? Yvette.
Stephen, thank you for raising it. And I would also pay tribute to other families and people who have lost friends and loved ones in the most unimaginable circumstances. And it is actually really hard to keep raising it or campaigning on it, but it's incredibly important that you do. So thank you, and we think of Tom. We have to act. There has been an 80% increase in knife crime over the last 8 years. And it is killing our young people. It is devastating families. That can't just be a few token measures here and there. It has to be comprehensive. It does have to involve more police on the streets, and we have set out a plan for 13,000 more neighbourhood police. But it also has to mean there are proper consequences for carrying knives. There has to be a mandatory referral to the youth offending teams. Too often there are just no consequences. We've also got to have a proper crackdown.
Mean, if someone goes to youth referral team,
what
would then happen? It will
depend on circumstances. It'll depend on whether this is somebody, it's the first time they've been caught carrying a knife. It'll depend on what the circumstances are, how old they are. So it has to be dedicated for that individual. But you can't just do that. And it has to be the full, you know, it may be custody if depending on the seriousness of the offence. We've also got to stop these knives being so easily available online. We've had awful attacks with panther knives that you can still buy easily online. With ninja swords, you can still buy easily online. We have to have a ban on some of these dangerous weapons that are far too easily available. And we have to crack down on the criminal gangs that are drawing young people into crime. We want to see stronger laws there as well. But we've also got to do more on prevention. And so we would set up a Young Futures programme, youth hubs around the country with youth mentors to actually prevent young people being drawn into crime in the first place. A bit like in the same way the last Labour government did the Sure Start scheme, that was one of the schemes I was involved in government, and I am proud of that scheme. We would try and do a teenage Sure Start effectively to give our teenagers and young people their future back. But this has to be about all of us. And what Keir Starmer said is we want to set this as a mission for the country to halve knife crime over the next 10 years. That will only happen if actually that becomes above party politics. If all of us are part of it, it has to be a mission for every single one of us to make sure no more lives are lost.
Andrew, so let's talk about the government's record. So knife crime has increased by 7%. From 2022 to 23, or knife-enabled crime, as the police call it, in England and Wales. That's just in the last year. It's increased considerably more than that over a longer period. What have you got to say to Stephen?
Well, thank you very much for raising this issue. I want to try and stick to Yvette's example of trying to take this above politics. What the government has done is to increase substantially sentencing for carrying knives, but we also need deterrence. I have been a critic of stop and search in the past, but I think used more sensitively, it has a significant role to play. I think technology also has a role to play. And
but what about Stephen's point that if facial recognition can only go so far if someone's...
No, I agree with that, but I think there are other aspects of technology we can use, not just facial recognition. I think we need to do far more to restrict availability. And I also think that there's a lot more we can do within schools. And in my constituency, I've spent quite a lot of time in schools making clear to students that they must never carry knives, because if they do, they are as likely to be a victim as anyone else. And I think it's very important to continue the process of deterrence, the process of education, and also, as part of deterrence, to toughen up the sentencing for knife crime.
Well, you talk about toughening up sentencing, but the government put forward the Criminal Justice Bill in November last year, and that does include a tougher punishment for carrying a knife. That bill is still unpassed, it's just in the report stage.
Well, we did not manage to get full agreement on that bill across the House of Commons. I wish we had been able to do that. We weren't able to do so, but I hope very much that what Stephen has said tonight will be heard, and that the new government of whichever party will take it forward. And I agree quite a lot with what Yvette has said.
Okay. That bill was supported by Labour, so that, yes, it had cross-party support.
But some of it did, but not all of it, and that's the reason for the delay.
Let's hear from us. I will obviously come to you two as well, but the woman in the front in the spotty red top.
You've spoken about increasing sentences. That relies on people being charged with these crimes, and our courts are at breaking point. And if people can't be charged, then they can't be sentenced. How is that going to help?
Because, of course, there's a massive backlog in the courts at the moment. You've got a blue shirt on at the back there, yeah, in the middle.
Andrew, you mentioned having an increase of discussion about knife crime in school and bringing awareness to young people. Now, I'm a young person, I go to school. I've seen a drastic increase in people talking about knife crime, people making us aware about knife crime. But what I've not seen is a reduction in antisocial behaviour that tends to lead to people committing crimes. So what I want to know is, like, how are the government going to actually put this education into action through the use of the police and the use of sentencing?
OK, let's hear from the woman here. Yes. Yes, you.
Andrew, I'm sat here and I'm baffled that you can talk about serious youth violence as if your party isn't directly responsible for services being stripped to their bones. Grassroots organisations are on their knees that are supporting vulnerable young people. Until you acknowledge that we need proper investment into early intervention services. Police need a working definition of child criminal exploitation. Young people need to be treated as the victims that they are, as vulnerable young people, not further criminalised, further harmed and further pushed to the edges of society. At best, your party has been incompetent. At worst, you have been negligent, and you are directly responsible for the increase in youth violence and loss of life and liberty that we are seeing in our communities.
Andrew, I will, of course, give you a chance to respond to that. Let me just come around the rest of the panel. Layla, so what about Stephen's point, particularly that reducing the number of stop and search is going to exacerbate the problem rather than help it? That's your point of view.
No, thank you, Stephen, and I'll address that point directly. When we talk about increased bobbies on the beat, we're not just talking about them standing there doing nothing in a uniform. What we know is that where you've got police who are embedded in their communities, who know these kids from a young age and can see how they are progressing, maybe it will start with a bit of graffiti, maybe then they notice that their mental health starts to go downhill, they can then refer them on to other places. So it's not about not tackling the issue, but the randomness and quite often the discriminatory nature of stop and search, particularly in urban centres, we think are a waste of police time, and they'd be better off getting to know those communities and growing up with them. But the point about prevention is key. And what is causing a young person to feel that they need to go out with a knife? And it's in part fear. It's in part deteriorating mental health in young people. So what I know works in areas where I've been an MP are youth services, where it's not just about a room. It's where you've got youth workers who are on the streets getting to know those young people in their own backyards, who can then divert them on. The Lib Dems want to introduce mental health drop-in hubs in every community, paid for in part by raising taxes on the big social media giants.
OK, but what about Stephen's point?
If a young person's got an issue, they are diverted to there by those extra police, rather than just being left to deteriorate.
There will be some people who commit knife crime because they have mental health issues. There will also be some people who do it for all sorts of other reasons. So that isn't necessarily the answer to all of that. But Stephen specifically asked about the Lib Dems policy wanting to reduce stop and search.
I thought I'd answered that. So, yes.
Sorry, in that case, I didn't catch it. So how do you defend that to Stephen?
Our concern is that it's discriminatory. Our concern is that it's actually counterproductive. You end up, if you've got trust between bobbies on the beat in your community who know those young people from when they're really young, you can actually divert them away from crime earlier. And that's what, in part, used to happen. But the other thing I'll just say quickly, it's also deprived areas where this happens the most, and we can't do this without also reforming the welfare system, and we would remove the two-child benefit cap. Because if you've got children and families in poverty, that is one of the causes of high areas of knife crime.
Stephen, I know you'll want to come back. I'll come back to you at the end. I'm just going to hear a few more voices first. Yes, man there in the...
I think something that's forgotten a lot in this debate is the role that social media can play in these feuds. They very often start on social media or videos are posted on social media. So I'd like to ask the panel how they're going to regulate these companies, because I feel like Twitter especially, some of the stuff you can access on Twitter is just disgusting.
OK. The woman here in the front, can we get a microphone there? Yeah.
I'd like to understand how you propose that the police build the trust, especially of the black community, because trust in police does not exist when it comes to the black community, because we are disproportionately affected by stop and search. So I'd like to understand how you propose that to happen.
Yeah. But which is exactly why we think we should be reducing stop and search and instead building that trust, because we know that in communities where you need to build that trust, exactly as you pointed out, stop and search deteriorates that trust and actually makes the job of the police harder because they won't get the data, they won't get the conversations they need to work out who it is they need to help.
Stephen, let me bring you in here. I mean, it's worth saying Scotland has had the lowest homicide rates for nearly 50 years, which is obviously a record I'm sure that you're proud of. It's also worth pointing out that last year there was a 12% increase in cases. The way it's defined by the police in Scotland is having an article with a blade or a point. So clearly that's something you need to be across and to be watchful for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we all need to be very conscious of this because it doesn't take long to search on the internet or to see a news story about one of the horrific circumstances that we've all seen. And indeed, I spend quite a lot of time in London, and some of the images that I've seen, particularly in trains of recent times, has been quite terrifying. Can I perhaps make an observation? And I think it's been touched upon, but probably not in as much detail as it probably should have. We're talking a lot about how you respond to someone with a knife or how you punish someone who does something bad, when in actual fact what we should probably be talking about is why this is happening in the first place. And it's because the fabric within society has been broken by 14 years of austerity, because of the fact that money has been stripped out of the public services that each and every one of you relies upon, because of the fact that our young people don't have the hope that they should have for their future. So they respond in a way which is filled with anger instead of optimism. And the only way to turn that around is to offer those young people that hope that they lack now. And I'm afraid that you don't do that in this election by continuing with what the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, call a conspiracy of silence on public spending. Now, whether it's Yvette, who's in government, or Andrew, there's £18 billion worth of cuts baked in to the next Parliament that neither of these parties are talking about. That's going to make things worse for public services. It's going to make things worse for young people. And that is what nobody in this room wants to see happen.
But, Stephen, sorry, two Stephens here, making things a bit confusing. But you're also talking about deterrence, about what someone has, how, in terms of sanctions against people. Yeah. Not just in terms of cuts of public service.
Yeah, no, of course. And I've spoken at length there about why young people end up in this situation. There's an example in Glasgow of a very successful scheme which was put in place by the Scottish Government with communities, and what we've seen as a result of that was a dramatic drop in knife crime. Maybe that's an example that colleagues around this table would be willing to look at and share the good practice that was put in place.
Steve, before I come back to you, Andrew, I must let you respond to the points made there in terms of cuts to youth services you were talking about. And further back there, you were talking about how does one translate people coming to your school and talking about it to actually a decrease in antisocial behaviour when you're saying, and you're still at school, you're seeing a rise in antisocial behaviour.
Well, I think trying to pull together some of the points that have been made, I think that the critical thing we need to do is to restrict availability and to educate. And that is about resources, but it's not principally about resources. And restricting availability means strong laws. We need to use schools to educate. The point I tried to make early on about the fact that if you carry a knife, you make yourself extremely vulnerable. And I think it is deterrence and education above all, which is what we need to do. I think there are other things too. I think the point that you made about the bad relationship which exists between different communities and the police, that is something we need to do a lot more to amend and to improve. I don't think we've done enough on that in recent years, and we need to do more. And as I said earlier, I'm a sceptic about stop and search, and it's in that context where you have better relations where stop and search has a role to play. But I'm worried that it hasn't been used in a way that is constructive. It's actually being used in a way that has brought people further apart.
So, Stephen, you've heard what the leaders of the parties here have had to say. What do you think?
I think, in some respects, people are trying to find excuses for what the youth generation of today are doing. I mean, I grew up through the winter of discontent, the major dole queues where you see, not for using a party political thing, but Labour isn't working, the amount of unemployed, the Thatcher years. I came up through the same times when it was hard at times. This is a basic question of knowing wrong from right. I mean, this isn't one to do with, you know, people are on really hard times at the moment. This comes down to a fundamental, people know what's right and what's wrong. And if you go out with a knife, that is wrong. And this needs to be instilled to people, whether it's from the parents, whether it's from the schools, whether it's from youth clubs or whatever. They really need to know what is wrong and right. If there isn't a deterrent, a custodial deterrent for it, then what is a deterrent?
Okay.
Because, I mean, the Labour manifesto, and I'm not going to dig at Labour, I'm not going to have a dig at Conservatives or anything like that, but to say that they'll tag them and then if it's a really serious issue, then they'll go for custodial. What is really serious? Using it? Surely you should be stopping it before they use it.
OK. All right. Listen,
just very quickly coming up. Look, I could set out all the things that I think have gone wrong over the last few years. The big cuts to neighbourhood policing that we've had, the impact on youth services, the fact that actually we just haven't caught up with the online issues that you raised because the online safety bill's been slow. There's a whole series of different problems. Of course, there has to be clear consequences for carrying a knife, and there aren't. There's a whole series of things that need to be done on prevention, on the law, and having stronger laws and crackdowns. But part of the reason that I haven't on this one is, and I'm sure we'll have these debates on every other question, is because the debates that Keir Starmer's had with many families who have been affected is that people want to be able to come together on this one. And that's why he's described this as being a moral mission for everyone. Because it's about young people, because it's about getting young people's future back, and because we face a growing epidemic, we can keep disagreeing about different causes and we can keep disagreeing about different possible solutions. But actually, on this particular issue, we need everyone to come together and make it a moral mission to give young people their future back.
OK, right. Look, we'll take another question, but Stephen, thank you very much for that. Before I do, I'm just going to tell you what's happening, not next week, but tomorrow. My goodness. Double bubble of Question Time this week. So 6 million of you, over 6 million of you, watched some part of last week's Question Time Leaders special, and tomorrow night we're doing something similar. So we are going to have half an hour with the co-leader of the Green Party, and we will then have another half hour with the leader of Reform UK. And then, and if you want to be in the audience for that, so that's here in Birmingham tomorrow night, go to our website because there's still places to come. And if you want to come and be part of that programme, put your questions directly to them. And then, obviously, next Thursday's election. We won't be on air, but we will be on Friday. So who knows? Who knows? Who knows what you'll be doing, Yvette? Who knows what you'll be doing, Andrew? We should find out. So that's a special programme.
I think we do know.
I think that's a special programme on Friday. And again, that's in London. If you want to be part of the audience, go to the Question Time website and follow the instructions there. OK, let's take another question. Let's come back to this week and to today. Jasmine Silver.
With the recent gambling scandal, infighting and general bad behaviour that I wouldn't accept from my 3-year-old child, why should we vote for any of you?
Ooh, that you wouldn't accept from your 3-year-old. OK, Jasmine, we hear you. Andrew, why should we vote for any of you, she's asking?
Well, I greatly regret what we have heard about this betting scandal in the last week, but you should vote because there are real differences between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and indeed the other parties as well. And I'm delighted that we're here tonight in Birmingham because this is just the right city in which to discuss the difference on tax and spending which exists between Labour and the Conservatives. This great city has been brought to its knees by the Labour administration. It's the largest authority in Europe, and it has been brought to its knees by mismanagement and incompetence. It's been bankrupted. And as a result of that, we've seen tax rising across Birmingham of 21% over 2 years on your council tax. They're going to stop spending money on libraries. In fact, they're going to close
Yes, but hang on, just a minute. Jasmine is going to vote... Hang on. All that may be true, but Jasmine is voting in the Westminster election next week, not in the local council election. So do you want to... Jasmine, is this a question about trust as much as anything?
I think it is about trust. I think politics more recently feels chaotic. It feels a little bit like carnage. And I don't know who I can trust, actually, in Westminster now.
All right, so why should Jasmine trust you in Westminster?
So I'm trying to explain that there's a difference. There's a big difference. Everyone says that basically we're getting Tory... I mean, something that Stephen would definitely say, we're getting Tory measures administered by Labour men and women. It's not true. There is a real difference. The Conservative Party believes that you should keep as much of your income as you can and be taxed as little as possible. The Labour Party believes that taxation should increase. In fact, if you look at our manifesto, there are no tax increases at all in that. and in the Labour manifesto, there are no restrictions on spending at all. So there is a big difference. I'm trying to answer. I'm trying to answer the question about why you should vote. You should vote because there is.
And why she should trust you. That's also what she's asking.
An enormous difference. Well, you know, politics is made up of people on the right and the left who believe in certain things. Some of the things I've just been talking about. If the polls are to be believed, there's going to be a significant Labour majority, and it's the job of people like me, millions of people are going to vote Conservative, to say why it is important that there should be a very strong Conservative vote for the things that we hope you will trust and which I and others believe in.
All right, so Yvette, why should we vote for any of you? I mean, obviously, in this gambling, I mean, it's hard to keep up. But, I mean, so far we've got, I mean, the BBC's reporting anyway, up to 15 Conservative candidates and officials are being investigated by the Gambling Commission. Labour, of course, has suspended one of its candidates, Kevin Craig, who bet against himself. All permutations are there. Why should we vote for any of you? Why should we trust you? That's what Jasmine's asking.
And I think trust in politics has fallen, and I'm just really sorry, Andrew, but when you come up with just all of those inventions, you just keep making things up, I think that undermines trust even further. This is a question about this gambling saga. I mean, you really couldn't make it up. I thought after Partygate, I'd kind of seen the limit of this just totally chaotic, self-interested, one rule for them and another for everyone else kind of behaviour. But no, they've gone a step further. And we've got, you know, these allegations of people who were told the date of the election, and then instead of thinking, well, that means I've got to go out there and start earning votes and start winning votes, actually just thought, no, actually, we're going to go straight to the betting shop and try and put a bet on instead. It is just incomprehensible. So, look, you're right. There has been a case that's been investigated by the Gambling Commission in the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer has taken fast action to say, look, this is unacceptable. And I think he's shown leadership, and he has said, right, very swift suspension. I just do not understand why Rishi Sunak has taken so long. I think it has been really weak. I think he has to show leadership. You have to have some leadership. We've got a lot of work to do to rebuild trust. I think a lot of the collapse in trust has been about those sorts of standards issues where you have to have a reset in politics. I also think it has been about a sense that after 14 years, everything just feels broken. And all of the promises that have been made, I totally understand people's frustration. That is why we need change. But in order to get change, we have to vote for it, every single one of us. So I really, really hope that you will feel able to vote for that change.
Well, let's find out, Jasmine. I'm going to ask you. But also, I just should point out that clearly these are all allegations at this stage. No one has actually been found guilty.
And I did say allegations.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I'm just pointing it out. So, Jasmine, I'm going to come to Stephen and Layla, but you had your hand up straight away.
I do agree that Labour have their issues, but can Conservative MPs behave appropriately? Are they able to? Because so far what we've seen, especially the last few years, is that you can't. You don't know how to conduct yourself appropriately.
Yeah, briefly.
I don't think trust in politics is improved by the approach that Yvette was taking. The vast majority...
Andrew, hang on. Jasmine is asking about the Conservatives.
Yes.
You want to answer that point?
The vast majority of members of Parliament on all sides are honest, decent people trying to do a good job. And if you take a few bad apples and you damn the whole profession on that basis, you will not increase trust in politics.
All right. Now, Stephen, let's come to you now. Now, as far as I'm aware, the gambling issue has not touched you personally or the SNP. No. I mean, listen, let's just broaden it out for a second, because Jasmine's talking about trust. And obviously the SNP has had issues, not with gambling, but in terms of investigations into Nicola Sturgeon, former leader of the party, the number two, the treasurer in the party, and also you've got the former chief executive of the party who's been charged with embezzlement. So in terms of trust and the SNP and restoring the reputation of politicians, what have you got to say to that?
So, look, I get it. I totally understand it. I've been watching the news stories like everyone else over the course of the last couple of weeks and been a bit scunnered by it. The fact that we've got Labour candidates betting against themselves, Tories betting on dates. The leader of the Scottish Lib Dems has been betting on candidates to win across Scotland, despite, of course, knowing about what those results may or may not be based upon the work that they've been doing. It's not good enough, and you deserve better, and you should demand so much better from your politicians, which is why at this election you should vote for people who have strong values and you should vote for what you believe in.
And do you think that includes the people of Scotland, given what's going on with the SNP at the moment?
I'm not sure.
And the police investigation?
I'm not sure there's an equivalence between
No, I'm not saying it's
gambling.
equivalent.
Yeah.
But I'm saying in terms of issues of trust.
But you know as well,
reputation.
I can't, of course, comment on an active police investigation.
No, I don't mean that. But Jasmine's question, we're not in Scotland, but obviously you're here, and so I want to make it relevant to you as well. Gambling is not relevant to you. In terms of issues of trust, when we have been in Scotland, we've had people in the audience saying, I want to trust the SNP, but I don't know if I can, given what's going on. There's a police investigation, I don't know what to believe.
Yeah, and this was the point I was coming on to make. So for this election, for people in Scotland, but hopefully for people here as well, you should base your decision upon what your politicians' visions are for the future. Now, our vision is very clear. We believe that you should have investment in the NHS. We believe that you should reject £18 billion of austerity cuts. We believe that you should rejoin the European single market, increase migration because it's good for the economy, and ultimately double down on investment in net zero technologies because that's what the rest of the world is doing. Westminster's lagging behind on that. So when it comes to the election, vote for what you believe in and make sure that you hold your politicians to account on delivery.
Layla.
So, Jasmine, what you said is what I keep hearing when I'm talking to people on doors. And the words I keep hearing is shenanigans. They are done with the shenanigans. They just want people to get on with the job of governance. And what also loses trust in politics is that we are talking about this and we're not talking about the big issues. We're not talking about the NHS, the cost of living, the scandalous sewage dumping. So in those areas where you blame the shenanigans, I think quite rightly, on the Tories, Lib Dems have won a series of by-elections off the back of their various shenanigans.
Well, talking about shenanigans, I mean, your question is prompted by what's happening with the betting scandal at the moment. We've got, and I'm not suggesting he's done anything wrong, but you've got Ed Davey saying he bet on the outcome of the 2010 election, the 22 by-election, North Shropshire. I mean, is that OK?
Well, so what we said on that, we need a review of the gambling rules. I do think there's a difference between, like, people in a room knowing the date of an election and then them going out. And then in a democracy...
Oh, so we don't know that that's happened.
Well,
that's
we don't, as allegations. And then in a democracy, and I know this from personal experience, the night I won my seat, I was told I'd lost. And I told my boss at the time, I was like, don't worry, definitely not going to win. And then I did. So in a real democracy, you don't know the outcome of elections. And in seats, if you want the Tories out, and the Lib Dems are the ones to change that seat, you'll know where you are because there are big orange diamonds everywhere and there's leaflets through your door. If you want the Tories out in those seats, you need to vote Liberal Democrat. And with that, you will get a local champion who will champion those big issues that really matter to the country right now.
Layla, I'm maybe picking you up wrong here, but you're almost suggesting that it's OK for politicians to have a gamble if they just don't know for certain that something's going to happen. Well, I hate to break it to you and to the public, but we are privy to lots of information based upon how everyone's going to vote from all the canvassing, all those people who trap your doors. We get to see what that means. We have lots of polling data behind the scenes that tells us what is likely to happen in certain areas. And I find it morally repugnant that anyone in politics would seek to capitalise upon that, to put their own financial interests first, when what they should be doing is looking out for the public's interests and trying to improve the lives of the public. That is wrong. It needs to be sorted, and it needs to be sorted now.
OK. All right, let's move on. We had a few questions about that, but we've got a lot of questions about this next subject. Erin Norman. Yes.
Hi. So I've heard lots about promises to give young people opportunities that they deserve. But it's been really disappointing to see that policies that have been gone back on include many of those about climate change. And I want to know, when are you going to wake up and see that it doesn't matter what opportunities you can give young people if you cannot commit to climate change promises?
And Erin, you're a first-time voter.
I am.
And is this going to be the thing that sways how you vote?
Potentially.
OK. And have you made your mind up yet?
I think I have.
OK, well, we'll let you keep that to yourself for now. Stephen, these opportunities mean nothing if you don't stay committed to climate change. Of course, in Scotland, the Scottish Government's had to scrap its 2030 target to reduce emissions by 75%. The SNP's missed 19 of its last 13 annual benchmarks for tackling climate change. So, as far as Erin is concerned, you're certainly not helping her.
Well, of course, energy is a reserved matter to Westminster. We try and do the best that we can.
9 targets out of 13.
We try and do that our best within the devolved framework as it exists. So firstly, for young people, when it comes to opportunity, young people in Scotland have something that young people in England are deprived of, and that's free university education. And it is a great pity that both the Labour Party, the Conservative Party and I believe the Lib Dems don't share our aspiration.
Hang on, Stephen, hang on. In fairness, Erin wants to talk about climate change.
But when it comes
if you don't want to talk about missing climate targets, let's talk about oil and gas licences.
I'm quite happy to talk about climate change. Now, coming on to that.
OK, well, that's the one thing she wants to hear about rather than tuition fees.
So I think tuition fees are important to you.
They are, but she specifically asked about... OK, Erin, forgive me. Just because you asked about climate change, I was trying to keep it on that subject.
Well, I'm interested in both climate change and tuition fees.
Well,
fair enough.
Thank you for that helpful intervention there. But when we're looking at net zero, what really frustrates me is the fact that in Westminster all we hear about is we need to roll back on it. Net zero is a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity to combat the climate crisis, but it's also an economic opportunity, because what we have the ability to do is to harness our natural resources to create good, sustainable, long-term jobs for the future. Why would anyone not want that to happen? And in Scotland, we've got an abundance of offshore wind potential, green hydrogen potential, carbon capture potential. The future is bright and the future is green. But to make that happen, we need a Westminster system that wants to invest in green energy. The Tories are climate deniers. They're not interested in climate change at all. They're trying to combat it. And the Labour Party have walked away from their £28 billion commitment to green energy. How dare they, betraying our economic future but also betraying the planet's future. And in its place, they want to create GB Energy. But nobody knows what that's going to do. It's not going to sell electricity or energy. It's not going to produce electricity or energy. In fact, I think it's just a company that's going to be an investment arm for the private sector. But perhaps Yvette can do something which Keir Starmer and every other senior Labour politician up till now has failed to do, and clarify exactly how cutting £28 billion from their commitments is going to combat climate change and allow us to hit net zero. OK, would you also like to answer, Erin, about oil and gas licensing? Because the SNP has changed its position on this. Under Nicola Sturgeon, was absolutely saying no to new oil and gas licences. The SNP is now saying some oil and gas licences, depending on whether they meet climate compatibility. I mean, the Climate Change Committee says there are no new oil and gas licences that could possibly be in line with net zero. So how do you defend that to Erin? So when it comes to oil and gas licences, the answer is very simple. In order to hit net zero, you need people to do that. You need a workforce that is skilled to do that. The workforce that does that, or could do that at the moment, is employed in the oil and gas sector. So you need to make sure that those people's jobs exist for long enough to allow them to transition, or you don't hit net zero. And when we talk about this specific issue, the Labour Party proposals, as they stand, would cost 100,000 jobs in the North Sea sector. So not just getting rid of the £28 billion, but getting rid of the very... You know that figure is disputed, the 100,000, for the North East sector. I mean, there's other institutions looked and said it was about 40,000 when it comes to the North East of Scotland. Sorry, this is independent work from investment analysis. And as politicians, when it comes to experts, we should probably start listening to them if we want to meet our targets. So the Labour Party have not just walked away from their £28 billion green energy commitment, they're also walking away from 100,000 people who can deliver net zero. It's
Yvette,
not good enough.
I'll get you to answer in a minute. I'm just going to come around the rest of the panel. Layla.
So thank you for the question, because actually climate is... it's literally the existential threat to the entire planet. And what I want to see is action that happened yesterday. And one of the things that was scrapped in 2016 was we had a programme where every new house that was built was meant to be built to net zero standard. And in 2016, the Tories scrapped it. So we would bring that back. We would have mass insulation, so that not just the poorest, starting with the poorest, but then everyone has their energy bills go down, but actually there's social justice in that as well. And we've got to get to net zero as quickly as possible. Our commitment's 2045. So we think that we need significant investment in that, but that is saving for the future, because there is an alternative cost, and people have been throwing around hundreds of billions. But what's it going to cost if we get this wrong? How much more money are we going to have to spend on flooding, on saving people from the changing climate? Our farmers are ready and waiting to help, and yet the government has not invested in farmers so that they can improve biodiversity and, as we've seen from the war in Ukraine, grow local food that we need so desperately.
Can I ask you about something?
There is a government, that this Tory government has reneged on its promises on climate, and the Liberal Democrats are really strong across the board. It needs to be a whole of society
ask you about
approach.
something in your manifesto, which I think is relevant to Erin's question, is that you want to plant 60 million trees a year and double wildlife habitats, woodland cover, protected area network. You also want to build more houses than any other party, 380,000. I mean, putting aside whether or not that latter pledge is possible, can you do both?
Of course you can. And the approach, and people often ask, what's the difference between the Lib Dems and other parties? It's that bottom-up, community-driven approach, because you can have both. And we've seen it done where there are Lib Dem councils.
There's enough space for both?
Yes, there is. We have seen, when you've got Lib Dem-run councils who are running local plans, you can have, at the one hand, rewilding of meadows and, at the same time, record rates of house building. But we can't do it without legislation that actually gives power into the hands of communities, because they know where this can go best.
All right. There's another of our first-time voters got your hand up there. Yes, in the brown top.
Aside from austerity, privatising our water companies, allowing water companies to dump sewage in our rivers, how else are the Conservatives planning to destroy our wildlife and green plans for the future?
All right, Andrew, well, that's not quite the question Erin's asking, but it's certainly along the same lines. Erin's question is, what's the point of making promises to young people if you don't stay committed to climate targets? And you're raising points aligned to that.
So, thank you very much for your question. I want to put a slightly international slant on it, because over recent years, working in the Foreign Office, I've been engaged in international climate change, and where Britain is a real leader. We are spending a phenomenal amount of money, £11.6 billion, on tackling climate change, but we also are doing an enormous amount in the international forward to drive forward the climate finance which deals with this. And around the world, it is the poorest people who suffer first and hardest from climate change. The fact that it is the existential issue of our time, where I entirely agree with Layla, is very important. That has always been understood in parts of Africa and in the poorest parts of the world. I think it is now understood here. And Britain has taken the co-chair of the Green Climate Fund. We've put in $2 billion of money, taxpayers' money, to drive forward this agenda. So I want you to know that in terms of the international role, Britain really is right at the forefront of pushing this forward.
But can I just because hang on, Andrew, because the Conservatives, well, under Rishi Sunak anyway, have delayed the ban on sales of new petrol diesel cars. They've moved it back from 2030 to 2035. I could put the same point I put to Stephen, but obviously it's in your gift. Issuing new oil and gas licences. This is something that Rishi Sunak is committed to. Repeating what I said to Stephen, the Climate Change Committee says issuing new oil and gas licences is not in line with net zero. How is that helping someone like Erin?
So I hope I've been able to try and describe that Britain really is a leader internationally. Now, moving to the domestic position...
How is that compatible with the 2 points I've just made?
Rishi Sunak had to be dragged kicking and screaming to COP.
He
barely made that a priority. Let's not forget that. And you've cut development spending.
Moving to the domestic point.
So the same poorest communities in the world that need to mitigate climate change, the front line, you've cut the money that went to climate resilience internationally. I'm sorry, Andrew, but I just don't buy it.
We've put in an enormous amount of taxpayers' money into driving this forward, and Britain is a leader. On the domestic front, we will reach the targets which we signed up to in Paris. We are able, therefore, to take our foot off the accelerator and cut electricity bills for families which have a tough time in meeting them. And we can still meet those things that we have signed up to. And the point about what Stephen is saying, I have some sympathy with what Stephen is saying, because developing these new licences will not prejudice our ability to meet these targets. But if we don't develop them, there will be other side effects which will make the position worse. And remember that Britain has the three biggest wind farms in the world offshore. We are a real leader in this area, and I hope you will have some confidence in what the government's been doing.
Andrew, not a single bid was made for the offshore wind auction round on your government's watch. You were warned by the renewable sector time and time again for months, and as such we've not seen projects come on stream that should come on stream. That's happened on your government's watch.
Okay. Man there with a headband.
It's mind-blowing to listen to any Tory talk about the climate, and your leader, our Prime Minister, has just had a brand new swimming pool installed in his house that needed new lines for the national grid to run it. So he doesn't care about the climate crisis or the impact that energy requires. He just doesn't care.
All right.
Why should we believe anything that you say about the climate crisis and what you think about the climate when he's just had a brand new swimming pool that has
Is that
caused
right?
the National Grid...
I have read about whether it's true, but I'm not sure if it's true or not. Is that right? Did the National Grid have to put new lines down to heat his swimming pool?
I'm afraid I cannot enlighten you on the Prime Minister's swimming pool.
A new swimming pool.
Which swimming pool is probably the more pertinent question.
Okay. Man in the green shirt there.
I don't know how Andrew has the audacity to say that we're a leader in climate when all we've done is export our emissions to the countries that manufacture our products. But he is right that the poorest are most impacted. So why is no one proposing to tax wealth, the most wealthy, who are the most responsible for the climate crisis, to pay for the transition and to pay for that climate crisis, when we know that that's what we need? We need massive investment in public services. We need a Green New Deal that will actually transition us to a green economy that will solve the cost of living and the climate crisis.
OK, well, Yvette, let's come to you. I mean, Stephen was making points to you, but obviously you know that originally Labour was pledging to spend £28 billion a year. It's now more like £4 or £5 billion a year in terms of the green transition.
Well, we have to get on with this. I think the most troubling thing that Andrew said was we can take our foot off the accelerator when we just can't. There is too much at stake. And we have to invest in the new technologies of the future. We have to make sure that we've got clean energy. We've set a very ambitious plan to get to clean energy by 2030 and to set up GB Energy, to set up a new publicly owned company in order to drive renewables, in order to make sure that we get the renewables right across the country, alongside making sure that we also have a programme to insulate our homes, because too many homes, poor quality housing means that bills shoot up, and doing it in a way that also means we can bring our energy bills down. And I think that is the really important thing, because if we really should believe in the future for our young people, we have to both tackle the climate crisis and also make sure that we can get the jobs for the future from the new green technologies, and also make sure that everybody can afford this. And that's why, if you get GB Energy in place, if you bring those energy bills down by shifting to renewables and not being so dependent on Putin, on the international markets, then that way, actually, you win every way, and it just feels like it's a no-brainer. That's why I just cannot understand why you would take the foot off the accelerator and not get on with it.
Because we care about the bills that people are paying,
but this
and
is
we
the
want
point,
to make sure that we
brings
protect
bills
them.
down. The whole point about going to GB Energy is that it brings bills down.
I have no idea. Hang on. You're all talking at once. Wait a minute, Stephen,
tell us how GB Energy is going to do that.
GB Energy will work in partnership with the private sector to drive investment into new renewables and get the benefits for the taxpayer as well. Bring energy bills down. And what it won't do is carry on with new oil and gas licences that I just think the idea that the SNP are somehow painting themselves as green champions when they have reversed their position on new oil and gas licences, when actually it is possible to support jobs for the future and also bring energy bills down.
Right, let me come back to Erin. You're sitting there with your hand up.
I'm really happy that it's been noted that the climate affects some of the poorest the most. And I think that some of the things that we can do to help as citizens can also help with tighter budgets. So things like public transport. Yesterday I had to take a train. I took a train not very far from Birmingham to Oxford, and the price of a train is astronomical. How can selling contracts to private companies and not having a national rail service, how can that help the poorer people who are most affected by the climate? Because it does help the climate to do so. But it is you selling those contracts that makes it more difficult for the poor.
And it doesn't help that the new Labour mayor in the West Midlands promised not to put up bus fares, and I think this week has put them up.
OK, look, that's a subject we're going to come back to, Erin. I'm going to move on, because there's a lot of you asked about this next point. Jessica Glennie, where? Why can't I see? Oh, there you are. There you are. Off you go.
Hello. Today, the BBC tracked down the smuggler who killed Sarah, the 7-year-old who died whilst trying to cross the Channel recently. Will the parties admit that tragedies like these are a direct result of a failure to provide safe and legal routes?
So just to remind those of you who are not across it, it was a brilliant report by a fantastic journalist called Andrew Harding. And it's the second time, in fact, the BBC's now tracked down a smuggler. In the last couple of months, I think it was, a boat was full of migrants, was leaving the shores near Calais. The BBC happened to be there to film it. There was a young girl, Sarah. It was a very chaotic scene. 5 people died, including this young girl. as they were trying to make their way to the United Kingdom. Safe and legal routes. Yvette, what's your policy there?
So we've always had different kinds of safe routes for people who have fled persecution, like the Homes for Ukraine scheme. And I argued strongly for the Homes for Ukraine scheme, similarly the Syrian family resettlement scheme as well. But if you look at what's happening in the Channel, that is being driven by criminal gangs. And the images that we saw...
Yes, but it's also, hang on, it's also people who clearly are feeling that there aren't safe and legal routes for them. Yeah, whether they're economic migrants, that's one thing, or whether they're genuine asylum seekers, they feel there are not safe and legal routes for them, and so that's what they're resorting to.
Well,
so what's your question just is about safe and legal routes. What's your policy on that? Would you increase the number of safe and legal routes?
The UK will always need to do its bit to help those who have fled persecution and conflict, but anything that you do in that area does not solve the problems that are happening in the Channel, where these dangerous boat crossings are undermining our border security and putting lives at risk. Because the criminal gangs will just advertise, they will organise, and because they are making profit, there is an entire criminal industry that has spread along our borders, and it is hugely dangerous.
Hang on, just this question saying, will the parties admit that tragedies like this are a direct result of a failure to provide safe and legal routes? Do you accept that premise? And will Labour, because I noticed safe and legal routes aren't mentioned in your manifesto, do you agree with the idea that you should increase the number of safe and legal routes in order to prevent people coming in that particular way?
We continue to support things like the Afghan resettlement scheme, but really, what's happening?
I think you said
I don't think that tragedy was caused by that. I think that tragedy was caused by the criminal gangs, and they are dangerous. If anybody saw those awful images, we saw the violence from some of the smuggler gangs on the shores. It was clear from those images, and the reporter was saying so, that boat was overcrowded.
But what the father said of Sarah was that he couldn't find. I mean, rightly or wrongly, I'm not trying to say the rights and wrongs here, but he is saying he couldn't find any legal way to get here, which is why Jessica is asking. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And
will you admit that tragedies like these are a direct result of failure to provide safe and
There will always be different kinds of processes to manage asylum systems and to manage resettlement.
And so would Labour increase the number of safe and legal routes?
There will always have been, and there always will be, both safe routes, but there also will always have to be limits and constraints on them.
So what's your policy? Because you may be Home Secretary in a week, you may not, but if you're Home Secretary, will you increase safe and legal routes?
We will continue to support things like the resettlement schemes, and we believe that they should be reformed because they're not working.
I think that's a no.
Wait a minute,
you're not saying you'll increase.
I know, but you're not letting me finish. Let me finish the point, because I think this is important.
What do you think, folks?
It's a no. It's a no.
No, I think unless you deal with the criminal gangs in the Channel, this problem is going to get worse. No, wait a minute, let me finish.
You've had plenty of time to talk there, I'm sorry.
I've been interrupted, Stephen, and you've interrupted me as well.
You undermine the criminal gangs by providing safe and legal routes, as Jessica has outlined. That is the solution to this problem.
Those criminal gangs will keep on operating.
And you want to know what the issue is?
Those criminal gangs will keep on operating. They are making hundreds of millions of pounds in the Channel. Nobody is going after them. At the moment, a journalist was more successful in tracking down those people smugglers than law enforcement. That is shocking. Those criminal gangs crowded people onto that boat and they got away with it. Those criminal gangs organisers are then just being able to continue to make money, putting more people in it. That's why we need a new border security command that can go after those gangs and make sure they face justice for these terrible crimes.
Layla.
Jessica's question.
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said there. Say
that again. Question, yes or no?
I don't think that any changes. I don't think any changes. I don't think any changes to legal routes would prevent the criminal gangs operating. So you have to go after the gangs.
This is the issue with
politics. We do need to have proper resettlement schemes, but I don't think they would prevent the criminal gangs operating. We have to go after those gangs.
Is that Layla?
So the question was, do the Liberal Democrats think...
Well, everyone here, but yes.
Everyone here. But does our party think that what happened was a direct result of a lack of safe and legal routes? And the answer is yes. OK? Absolutely yes. For a couple of reasons. First of all, it is the right and moral thing to do where there are conflicts across the world, and just because there's one country you don't choose above the other, and there has been, and I'm afraid to say there have been parallels drawn, and I've been strongly supportive of the Ukraine scheme. I had a Ukrainian living with me. We're now best friends. I love that scheme, and there are problems and it needs reforming, but it made no sense why Afghan interpreters were not allowed to come across on the Afghan scheme. And actually, there are many other countries in the world that desperately need safe and legal routes. And people do this out of desperation. They do it because they've got nowhere else to be. They do it because they think they're going to die. That's why they're doing it.
So Layla, it's because in your manifesto you say we will work across borders to provide safe and legal routes to sanctuary for refugees. Do you envisage any limits to those safe and legal routes, or are you saying anyone who feels they have they're in fear of their safety can come to the UK? No matter how great the numbers are, they can come safely and legally.
There has to be coordination, and there has been
I'm asking
in the
about
past.
numbers.
Yeah,
As far as the Lib Dems are concerned,
coordination on the
what
numbers.
does that mean? Limit on the numbers? Is that another way of saying limit?
Well, so for example, where we have in the past been part of things like Europol, we might have been able to share data about where these criminal gangs are. We also used to have better agreements with other countries across Europe. We don't have that anymore.
You're not answering my question. My question is, if you're saying we will work across borders to provide safe and legal routes to sanctuary for refugees, I'm asking you directly, do you set a limit on that number, or are you saying anyone who has a justifiable reason for coming from anywhere in the world, they can come?
The international rules on asylum say that if you are someone fleeing persecution, you are allowed to be granted asylum and then have that asylum in the first, in a safe country.
So you're not setting a limit on numbers, just to be clear, because I've got to get round
No,
this.
I'm not saying that there are going to be numbers, but it needs to be done in coordination with other countries. I think people can understand what I'm saying there. It needs to be not just.
Well, I'm not
alone.
clear if you're setting a limit on numbers or not, but I don't know about anybody else here.
With other countries on this.
Andrew, we haven't got much time left, I'm afraid.
We have to stop the boats. As Yvette said, there are some safe and legal routes. There are for...
Well, Jessica's asking directly, will you admit that tragedies like that of Sarah, whose father said, I had no safe and legal way to go, is that the direct result of failure? OK, off you go. Well, let's do that.
So there are a number of things you have to do first, and I remind you that what Rishi Sunak said in the House of Commons was that when those things had been done, we would look at safe and legal routes. So my answer to you partially is yes, but first you have to do the things that he's done. He's doubled the caseworkers for dealing with these cases. He has improved significantly the working relationship with France, and you have to have the Stop the Boat scheme of sending people to Rwanda as a deterrent. And you have to do that. These people, these people smugglers, they are the modern-day equivalent of the slave trader. And they have to be stopped. And you have to do all those things, but you have to do Rwanda. Without doing Rwanda, you don't have that deterrent. And there was a very interesting article, actually, talking of journalists, in The Telegraph, which went and interviewed these people smugglers and some of the people who were waiting there, which demonstrated the deterrent effect of the Rwanda scheme.
If you want a deterrent, what you do is you take away the line of business for these people. And the easiest way to take away the line of business for some of the most horrific people on the planet, which these people are, is to create safe and legal routes. And then what you do is you treat people with dignity and respect. In stark contrast to the rhetoric we hear from the Conservative Party in Westminster and now the Labour Party in Westminster. What has become of the Labour Party that it trots out almost the exact same lines as the Conservative Party when it comes to migration and when it comes to asylum seekers?
Let me ask you, Stephen, the same question I asked Layla. Does that mean, then, that it's yes to all comers?
So the international norms are set. When someone is applying for asylum, they have the right to do so. As it stands, the UK takes less than our European partners when it comes to asylum seekers. That is the position we're in. We should be doing more. We can do more. But the Conservatives are afraid to do more because they're terrified of Nigel Farage. And the Labour Party are terrified of being outflanked by the Conservative Party, so chase them on this issue as well. You deserve better. Asylum seekers deserve better. Let's create safe and legal routes.
OK, now, you both want to come back in. We are out of time. Forgive me, Yvette and Andrew. Oh, my goodness. 7 days to go. Our hour is up. Remember, we're on again tomorrow night with the co-leader of the Greens and leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage. But for now, from Birmingham, from our panel and our audience here, good night.
for the fastest way to follow.